back to the Family Life Podcast. I'm so excited you guys are listening today. And we have some really awesome special guests joining us for our third episode. Before we jump into our topic, I would love to just get to know you. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your family? You want to go first?
Okay, you want to start with me?
Yeah.
All right. I'm Mike Vaughn. I'm the Campus Connection Pastor on the Goodyear campus for Palm Valley. And I'm married. I've been married actually on Saturday. It'll be 39 years to my lovely wife, Nisi. And we've got 3 adult kids. They're all in their 30s. And we've got 4 grandchildren who are just the absolute joy of our lives. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Sonia?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Saenz. I am the Senior Children's Director here on our Goodyear campus, but I oversee both of our campuses. I have a husband. His name is Hector, and I always laugh because it just brings me so much joy. We've been married for 22 years. I have him. I do, right? Married for 22 years. Almost 23 this year, so that is crazy. Half of my life has been with him. And then I have 2 girls. I have 2 daughters. One's 18 and the other one is 20, almost 21. And just love them dearly. They're my pride and joy. So
I love that.
that's a little bit about us.
I love hearing about our families. We're a Family Life Ministry podcast, so I feel like it's only fitting.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of people probably balance, they struggle with a little bit. And that's balancing your work life and your career with your family, because both of them, if possible, could take up all of your time. And so it's really hard to find that balance. But I would love to hear from you first. Like, how would you describe to someone listening what a work-life balance means? Like, what does that look like? Whoever wants to answer.
I'm going to be really honest because, we're being authentic here.
Yep.
I shared with Hector yesterday evening. I said, guess what I'm doing tomorrow? And he's like, what are you doing? And I said, I'm on the podcast with JC, and we're talking about work-life balance. And he looked at me and kind of chuckled and said, you? And I said, I know, right? And then he said, what are you going to share? That's an area that you have just not mastered. And I said, I know for sure. But I think it's so fitting. I think as women, and I'm going to speak from the women's perspective as well, we are given such gifts and talents, and we strive to do our best and be professional in our careers. I personally saw a role model who my mom just modeled it for us. She worked really, really hard all the time. And the time that she had off, she always wanted to do yard work. And to me, that's work. And she loves it. And so every time she was off, she was like, get in here and talk, help me out and stuff. And I didn't enjoy that. And so now that I'm in my adult life and I'm running careers and I'm figuring out how to manage my family and my life in my job, it's hard to find that balance because there are things that I do enjoy. Sometimes there are things that we need to do around the house. So finding that balance is always a challenge. It's giving yourself the space to rest as well as giving yourself the space to be successful. And that's kind of how I would describe work-life balance. It's just that, and it's a fine line. It's a very, very fine line. And so it could become gray and muddy. So I'm glad that we're talking about that today.
Yeah, I've had times when I've done it well. I've had times when I've not done it well at all. I've had more times where I've not done it well at all. I'll just be perfectly candid about that. I did not particularly have it modeled well for me. My mom was a homemaker, and so, obviously she was very available. And my dad worked really hard. He was a general foreman for Chrysler Corporation, and he worked afternoons, which meant he was generally at work from like 2 o'clock to midnight. And so because of his work schedule, I would usually, if he wasn't working overtime, I would see him on weekends, or he'd be a lump in the bed when I was getting ready for school in the morning, and because of his work schedule, he wasn't able to be at a lot of, like, if I was in school programs and things like that. My mom would come, but he often wasn't there, I didn't necessarily see that model for me. I knew I wanted to do it differently. Sometimes I was successful at that, and a lot of other times I wasn't. So, I mean, I'll be honest with you, there was a degree to which I thought that this was just a ruse for an intervention for me.
That's what
You
today
know,
is.
yeah.
For sure.
It's a
That's
kind
so
of
funny.
workaholics support group. But,
Yeah.
but my career's always been important to me, and
Mm-hmm.
and I love to work, and I love challenging work, and I get all of that in multiples here at Palm Valley. And I'm very passionate about ministry, so it's a challenge. I don't even know that I would describe it so much as work-life balance as much as it's tension management. There's a tension that you kind of always have between devoting the amount of time you need to devote to your family and devoting the amount of time that you need to devote to your work to be successful. And at times you feel that tension, and at times that tension subsides, and sometimes you need to kind of take the temperature, not so much by how you feel as much as by how others feel. You know, does my wife feel like I'm, present and available and engaged and those kinds of things? And there have been times when she's been good with that, or there have been times where I've had to really lean into work, and she has the patience of a saint, has been very understanding of that, because she knows the seasons, of ministry, like Easter and Christmas and things like that. And then there are other, times where there's the expectation that, hey, you gotta be available for this, and and she'll kind of make sure, is this on your calendar, and are you going to be here, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so you have to make sure that you don't just rely on your own sense of things, because there are going to be times when that's warped, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of listen to other people and read the signs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that you say like it's less of a balance and more of just measuring that tension, because I think we can strive to have the perfect balance, but odds are we're never going to get there, because life changes, new things get added to your plate, you get a different job, you do different things, or the seasons are changing. And I think that's so beautiful. Like when I asked both of you guys to come on the podcast, I got a laugh from both of you, and we're like, me? Really? Which is so funny and just very honest about, like, even people might look at us in ministry and think that we have it all figured out and that we're always perfect, but we're not. And that's why I love getting to talk to people about these topics, is just being vulnerable and letting people see our struggles, our successes, and learning from that. And so I would love to hear a time where you think maybe your balance or that tension wasn't well managed, and how did that affect your home life, or how did that affect your work life when you focus too hard on one and not the other? Whatever one of you.
And I can relate to what Mike was saying. You do become in a rhythm of a workaholic almost, and I almost thought this was an intervention for myself too, Mike. I'm not gonna lie, but I think when you're looking at managing your work life and making sure that you're still keeping your family life a priority, there are moments where you have to be told by someone else, like, you're working too much. And that happened to me a few years ago when the girls were still in elementary and they were getting ready to merge into middle school. I was working at a high school, and I was extremely successful there. We're running an amazing student club after school, and the kids were going to state, and we were traveling to nationals on competitions that they were winning. And so I was really devoted. Like, my spring breaks were getting them ready. My fall breaks were always getting them ready. And so there was a little bit of time where I was spending at home. I wasn't really present. I was always coming home, and I was just exhausted and depleted, and I wasn't giving my best to the girls. And I remember Hector sitting down and saying, "We really miss you. I know you're here and you're home, but you're really not present, and we miss you, and the girls miss you the most." And I missed opportunities, awards or assemblies, because I had a meeting or I had work to do, and that became a big priority. And it wasn't until he sat me down and said, "We miss you." And I'm sure my mom was praying really hard, like, have her realize that she's spending a lot of time at work. And at work, you find yourself, trying to strive to make something of yourself, or to be noticed, or to be recognized. And it wasn't about me. It was making sure my students were successful at that time. But at the same time, it was costing me being able to be present with my girls. And it wasn't until God called me out of that school and said, we're done here. And I heard it very loud and clear, where he was like, your girls need you at home. And I didn't sign my contract that following year. And that was right before they merged into high school. Jada was still in middle school, and Leah was getting ready to dive into high school, that God said, enough. You've done enough. You hit ceiling here. I had state officers that were representing the state of Arizona. I was teacher of the year in the state, and, just real successful. But he was like, it's not worth it when your kids are being lost and they're not being able to spend time with you. And it was probably the best decision. And I'm so grateful that God was able to just scream it almost into my soul and into my heart, where I could say, they did miss me and I did need to be there. And so it was costly to find that work-life balance. For those following 2 years, I was able to, drive them to school, and I would get that phone call, that first time that I got the phone call and said, Mom, I forgot something. And I could hear their kind of scared voice in the background, like, can you bring that to me? And I was like, absolutely. And gave them the car, and I drove there and dropped it off for them. It was the best feeling. And it was so freeing to find that my calendar wasn't full of responsibilities or activities that didn't revolve around my family. It was just such a relief, and just the weight lifted off my shoulders. And only God can give that to us. And just finding that peace and knowing. And as a mom, you always find yourself feeling, guilty, this guilty shame of, am I doing enough for my girls? Am I doing enough for my kids? Am I being a good role model for them? And I think that's when I realized, yes, I was being a good role model in the professional setting, but I wasn't being a good role model as a mom for them. And so that's when it gets a little bit tricky, and we get that mom guilt. And, now they see me and they're like, God, you've taught us to be successful. You've taught us to strive, or to have that grit and to be resilient. Now I'm like trying to gain back some of those years of, let me cuddle you and hug you and, embrace you. And I wish you were little again. But they've seen me work hard. And so it comes at a cost. It definitely does.
Yeah. You get some of it back when you get grandkids.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's going to be a few years.
Yeah, that'll be a bit. But, unfortunately, I probably have a catalog of stories I could tell you about when I didn't do it well. One that I remember in particular, because there's kind of like a lasting object that reminds me of it, sadly. We were living in Maryland at the time, and we were kind of in the suburban Washington, D.C. area. And I was working for an office furniture dealership, and I was an executive in this company, and at the time making probably as much money as I had ever made up to that point in my career. And I was working a lot and putting in just a lot of time and effort with this organization. And my wife was trying to make arrangements for a family portrait, one of those, usually yearly pictures that you get taken. And she had scheduled it, and I had some things come up at work. And so I said, hey, can we move that? And she said, yeah, I'll call and see if we can reschedule it. And she did, probably for like a couple weeks later. And then after she got it rescheduled, I couldn't make it again. And so I asked her, well, can you reschedule it again? And she got that thing moved, I think, like 3 times. And the 4th time, she's like, hey, we're going to have to, we got to do this thing. And I couldn't make it. I couldn't do it. And so she went ahead, and the proofs came back, and it was a picture of my wife and our 3 kids, and she looked like a single parent. And I was devastated by that picture. I still am whenever I look at it,
Mm.
because I just remember that, man, you couldn't get away for, you know, an hour and a half or however much time it was going to take. It was just one of those things. And so I was looking at it going, you know, these kids have a father. This woman has a husband,
there.
but it doesn't look like it. You know, I imagined her showing, you know, the picture to someone maybe just meeting her and them going, you know, so, you know, was your husband killed in the war, or what? Why are you alone? But yeah, it's one of those things. I had another, and I just remember when I looked at that picture, I just went, okay, this can never happen again. You know, I had an instance where we had moved back to Michigan at this point. We were living in Detroit, and my daughter had I think it was like a gymnastics program that she was in, and work got crazy that day, and it was an evening thing, and I ended up working late and then hustled out to get there, and I got there, but I missed her part of the program. And that was another one of those things where I was just like, okay, yeah, this is I just can't let these kinds of things happen. And it was kind of one of those points where I just kind of went, you know, there's always going to be something. So you just have to just say, hey, look, those things have to just, you know, be what they're going to be. And go be with your family when you need to. So I really made an effort from that point on. Whenever the kids, they were all involved in sports. My boys were in basketball. My daughter was she was in softball and basketball. And I just tried to make sure if there was a game, I was there. You know, and there was even a period of time where I went to practices and things like that, and had a summer where I helped with the boys' summer league thing. So I kind of assisted the coach, and I just tried to lean in more to be available, and because you know you have to. I don't know that you can make memories, but you can cultivate the opportunity for memories to happen. You know, and that's what I tried to do, you know, or at least try to be more intentional about doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. I mean, I've only been married for about a year and a half, so I don't have a plethora of stories yet. But something that I think is very unique about me and Zach, my husband, is we both work at the same place. And so it is very hard sometimes to go home and turn off work.
Right.
And so there have definitely been times where it'll be like 7 p.m. and we're still talking about Go or students or something really fun. And then we'll both have to reality check and be like, wait a minute, like we haven't stopped talking about work. And that's something that we've been balancing. And hopefully we can figure that out before we have kids. I know we won't. And we'll have plenty of stories where we have also lost that. But it's being cognizant. I like how you said, like, Hector has been that person sometimes to point that out in you. And your wife has been able to point that out and be like, hey, something's off balance here. And so I would love to hear maybe sharing with some people that maybe people have been voicing that, but they're not hearing it yet. What are those kind of, I guess, red flags, or what are those things that you can kind of do a heart check on to be like, am I out of balance? What are things that are showing up in my life that are evidence of an off balance or a tensions out of whack kind of lifestyle right now?
I think for me, I think when I heard the girls say, "Are you gonna show up? Are you gonna be there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm gonna be. Are you gonna be on time?" Those were red flags for me, because I was like, "Am I not present? Am I showing up late or halfway through their performances?" As they became more active in sports, like I made it a priority not to miss any of her tournaments. Like neither one of them. We were at every tournament possible. But you do get some red flags in your marriage as far as like the tension between you and your husband. Like, hey, you're going to do work again? You just like got off of work. There's times, and it just, I think with the rhythms of your career, where you're at in the year or in seasons, with me taking on this position, it has been me trying to figure out a rhythm and what that rhythm looks like. And because it's very different from my education career, like where I was lesson planning, I was still working on the weekends, or I was grading and I was still grading in the evening time. So managing that, and it almost feels the same right now, like making sure that I give myself some space. With them being in school right now, it's a little bit different because Hector's also in school and the girls are in school. So they're always busy doing homework. So I feel like I have the green light to, I can continue to work at home, and there's not going to be a say of like, hey, you're not spending time with us, because they're all busy in this season of their lives too. But back then it was more of, hey, we're all watching a movie, you want to watch with us, or we're going to work on this puzzle, or we're going to play a board game. And it always felt like I didn't have time for that because I was busy grading, or I was busy planning the next project or activity. And so that created some tension between Hector and I. And he was like, you need to just leave it for an hour or a minute. And so I'm more of a morning person when it comes to that. I'll get up super early before anybody's up. I'm up usually by 3 or 4 in the morning when I have big projects to get done. I know, sounds crazy, but that's really when it's quiet at home and there's nobody looking over to me to say, you're still working.
3 or 4 in the morning, it's quiet.
Yeah. It's quiet at my house. And so I use that time to like really dive into my devotional with God, or what am I working on right now, especially in this season, to get things done before my actual day starts. Because then I can come home and enjoy dinner, make dinner, or be able to say, let's go to dinner, or let's watch this movie, or hang out together, or go for a walk. Because if I don't, then it trickles down into the rest of my day, things that I didn't get done. And so I'm a big like to-do list person. So try not to fill my to-do list for the week with too much where it feels like I'm overbooking myself, or I'm going from one thing to another. Whether that be giving myself this headspace in the morning, or giving myself the headspace at night to just, my Fridays have become very sacred to me. I use Fridays as a day of rest. I don't touch my laptop. I don't try to answer any phone calls. I really have breakfast with my mom and enjoy my time with her. And then in the evenings, I enjoy my time with the girls. But that Fridays are like absolutely no work. And that's created a little bit of balance for me too there. So there are red flags. I think we choose to ignore them sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, whether it's not recognizing that they're red flags or what. To the guys out there, I would say, one obvious one is your wife mad at you.
Yeah.
If your wife's mad at you, why is she mad at you? And if there's not a particular thing, dumb thing that you did, it might be that you're just she may be just irritated that you're just never around or not available. And if that's something that's being said, and guys, we can rationalize. One, men tend to define themselves by what they do. So we find our identity at work, and men tend to really value being a provider. These are good qualities. It's that aspect of things where good things can start to get turned on their head and turned into disadvantages, right? So when you value what you do and you find your identity in it, which is that's a whole other thing, probably a separate podcast.
We'll bring it back.
And when you really value being a provider and you feel like you're doing it well, and because that's part of your calling is to provide for your family. When you then start to get complaints that you're not available or around, there can be a tendency to dismiss that on the part of a guy and go, well, you know, I need to be able to provide, you know, for us. And so, you know, just relax. It's fine, you know. And what can happen is that irritant can just start to fester and grow and turn into something big. So it's important to pay attention as early as possible to that. And believe me, I am not saying this as someone that has mastered any of this. Okay. I just know how to do it poorly. So I'm telling you what
it's
can
almost do
contribute
as
to
I
that.
say, not as I do.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
There we
it's or at least, hey, here's how I messed up.
Yeah.
Don't do
Here's
that.
how-
Don't
yeah,
do
don't do
that.
that.
You can be better by learning from me.
Yeah, and so yeah, pay attention to how your wife's relating to you, what kinds of things she's saying to you. Also, your kids are really they're adaptable in ways that aren't always helpful. Meaning, your kids will get to the point, if you're never around, your kids will get to the point where they don't expect you to be around. And so if you find that you're going to say, oh, hey, yeah, I'm going to be at your thing, and they look surprised, that's a red flag. Because that means they have adapted to your absence, and they just don't have an expectation. They're happy to get they're happy for the money and the shelter and clothing you provide, but they are accustomed to not having you, and that's not a healthy situation, because they want you, but they, you know, at some point they just kind of go, well, you know, this is what it is, and you don't want that. You really don't want that. Now, those are kind of the most glaring, I think, red flags.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of pointing out the people in our lives are the easiest way to know. And from a kid, especially kids, like they're so honest. Like I hung out in the 4-5 room the other day and just listening to things those kids say, I'm like,
They do.
how do you know that? It's just so crazy. And I think there's so much truth in your kids. They want a home. They want these things. Like your kids always ask you for money to go to the mall, things like that. But the most important thing for your kid is you. And the time that you spend with your kid is, they're going to remember that far longer than whether or not you bought them the new shoes because you stayed a couple extra hours at work, or all those different things. And so I love hearing that, like learning from the times where you prioritized work over family and feeling as though you saw the impact of it not being positive, and desiring to change that, because our families are so important, so much more important than our work, even though our work is still so important. But a lot of people out there, they have a job where their bosses or their coworkers, they don't really give them a time to step back. And there's a lot of that fear, I think, especially, I know you both have worked in a corporate world, where right now we're in ministry, where there's a lot more grace in our workspace, but in a secular world and different jobs, there's not as much space for boundaries and finding that balance. So I'd love to hear, how would you advise someone to create those boundaries at work where you're not just giving everything you got and not being able to say no, and finding that time for home?
And I think with boundaries, when you talk about boundaries, you know, they could be as insignificant to, you know, huge, like making sure you're taking your days off. Or for me, as I jumped into ministry, I always had my email on my phone, always. And so I was never like disconnected from work. It was sitting right there on my phone. So as I jumped into this position, I said, I just can't have that on my phone. As important as God's ministry is in our lives, it's going to be okay if it's not on my phone. And that's been a huge boundary for me, because before it's always been on my phone, and I'm like, you know, it'll be there tomorrow. And I think when you look at your work and your life, primarily in work, you create these unrealistic expectations that nobody's even really placed on in your job title. Like we create these additional responsibilities because they might be dreams or visions, or you have an idea that you want to see fulfilled. It doesn't come with a job description. It's just you taking that position or that career to the next level. When in reality, nobody's putting that pressure on you. We're creating the pressure for ourselves. So that's a lot of where the tension may come as well. And as you're living through these areas of boundary, is this an area that is being expected of me, or is this an area that I'm tackling onto myself? Can I say no to this? And is this going to hinder my opportunity of growth, or is this going to hinder my job? Because that's important too, making sure that we define what our job is and making sure that we align ourselves to what is expected of us instead of creating additional responsibilities for ourselves too. Yes, they're great and great outcomes come from there. But I found myself doing that in my career, like giving myself more tasks than I was actually even given. And my bosses looked great. They always came to me and said, "You always make me look good. I love that." And I'm like, well, that's great, but I'm exhausted. And so, or I haven't seen my family in like 3 days, or I come home and they're asleep already. And so as you navigate what is really important in your career, obviously there's things that, Sunday's coming. So in ministry, we got to be ready for Sunday. Kids need lessons in their rooms. We got to make sure that those get done. But are there other areas in your life, in your corporate job, or in your, even being a stay-at-home mom, that could become tasking on a mom, or a stay-at-home dad, because we do have those too, creating these unrealistic expectations of, I got to get this house to look spick and span all day long. And it's a never-ending task that, those boundaries are super important. And I say this, but, I'm learning and I'm navigating. When I jumped into ministry, they said, you'll find the rhythm. You'll find the rhythm of, busy seasons, and then slow it down on seasons that I think I've been running steady and hard. And as we sit here, I'm like listening to myself and listening to you. And I'm like, I got work to do. I got work to do in some of these areas myself too. So,
yeah. Well, I think the rhythm part gets more and more challenging as time goes along, because the rate of change in the workplace just keeps accelerating, and the kind of the nature of the demands of work, whether it's ministry or secular work, it just seems like it continues to just kind of come like a fire hose at people. So you have to you almost have to just take ownership of how you manage your time, how you lean into busy seasons, how you create seasons where you maybe kind of shift down a little bit out of necessity. Because one, you don't want to burn out. Then you're no good to your employer or your family. And you have to also make sure you understand what's available to you. What I mean by that is, particularly in your workplace, what does your benefits plan tell you is available to you in terms of time off that you can take for certain things going on in your life? Early in my career, I worked for IBM out of college, and I'm young and got married, and my wife and I, at this point, we had our oldest child, my son Mike Jr., and we were near the due date for our middle child, my son Jason. And at IBM, they had a very kind of early version of parental leave, where you could take a week off at your manager's discretion to tend to matters at home when you had a baby. And there were a lot of guys at our office that ignored that. They either didn't know about it or just didn't pay attention to it. And so, their wives would have a baby, and they'd be away for the delivery date, and then they'd be right back at work like the next day. And I had no intention of doing that. So My wife and I had talked, and we had agreed that when she got home from the hospital, she was going to spend all her time with the baby, and I was going to stay home, and I was going to hang out with Mike Jr. and just really just have a ball with him, so that he wouldn't feel neglected or that this new baby was somehow a threat to him in terms of him getting time and attention, that sort of thing. Because we wanted them as brothers to have a decent start, and we knew it was there'd be a challenge here or there, but we wanted to ramp up the odds that things went well. So in advance of that, I went to my boss, and I said, the benefits plan, allows for 4 weeks parental leave. I want to let you know I intend to take that when the baby comes, and my boss, who got married a little bit older or later in life and had no children, and he said to me, "Well, that's not just automatic. It's I have to sign off on that. That's at my discretion." And I said, "I know. That's why I'm telling you I'm taking that time off." And he said, "Well, I'm going to need to think about that. I need to review your project load. I need to, He went through a whole thing, So I wasn't brand new. I'd been at IBM for a few years, so I circled back to human resources. Which wasn't located in our office. So I made a phone call and talked to a rep and just kind of said, "Hey, I had a conversation, and this is kind of how that conversation went. And I'm not looking to, create a dust up or anything, but I just want to make sure I understand what my rights are." And so the representative that I spoke to basically said, a manager has to have an extraordinary circumstance in order to not approve your leave. I said, "Okay, thank you." And I would assume in extraordinary circumstances, like your customer's data center is on fire.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
Or
something
they're on
like
fire.
that. Right, yeah. So I waited a few days, and I went back to my boss, and I just kind of said, "Hey, have you thought about it?" And he said, "Well, I haven't finished reviewing your project load yet, so I'm going to need to let you know." And so I felt the need to really assert the priority that this was. And so I just said to him, "Okay, this is what I need you to understand. I have a baby coming, and I have a child at home. This is not an insignificant situation. This is something that is pivotal to a family. I recognize you've never gone through this. And I'm not saying that to throw it in your face. I'm just saying you are coming off to me as insensitive to a situation because you've just never gone through it. So what I need you to understand is when that baby comes, I'm not going to be here, and I'm not going to be here for a solid week. And that's it." And that was the end of the conversation. And there were no repercussions or anything like that. When I got back to work, we sat down and talked, and he told me, he said, "I was a little put out by the way you came at me on that thing." He said, "But I realized, what you did for me was help me understand what a high priority your family is." And he said, "To be honest with you, that's not the case with an awful lot of people here." And so it just didn't even occur to me that it was that big a deal, And I said, "Well, good. If it helped us to come to a meeting of the minds, then I guess that's good." I said, I said I didn't want to talk to you like that. I just felt like that was the only way I was going to get you to understand.
Right.
And that was kind of one of the rare instances where I advocated for myself in order to do what I needed to do to make myself available to my family. I wish I could say that I have a whole host of stories like that, but I don't. It's one of the few.
Well, that one really mattered.
Yeah,
Can't imagine your wife at home
Sure.
with a newborn and a child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that would not have gone well.
Mike would not be alive anymore, probably.
No, that's right.
That would have been another photo without you in
That'd
it
be-
too.
That.
That's right. That's right. There'd be family members going, "Remember Mike?
Oh, Mike.
He
Who was
good."
that guy?
Yeah.
That's so
How's
funny.
he doing? I love that.
Oh, well, to wrap up our time, I think some things that get people a little bit in trouble is being able to communicate with their family when work is a priority. And like we mentioned with ministry, Christmas and Easter, they're big times for us,
Mhm.
very busy. It's really exciting though. And a lot of jobs have those times. I think like tax people, they get busy around tax season, something like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But I think communicating with our families is a good way to help set those expectations, those boundaries. Hey, this is a busy season kind of a thing. What advice would you give to someone who is needing to communicate with their family? I'm going to be a little preoccupied in this season, and saying it in a way that helps their family understand, so that way they don't run into these seasons of like, where's my husband?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
When I was working in, particularly in the office furniture industry, and when I was in the computer industry as well, there would be times where it wasn't necessarily quite as predictable as it is at the church. So usually what I would do is I would let my wife know. She usually knew, like at the start of the year it was going to be busy because we're gearing up and we're doing things to kind of get a fast start to the year. She often knew maybe prior to the holidays there was going to be a lot going on to try to finish the year strong or whatever. But during kind of the general course of the year, what I would try to do is, if I started to realize I've got a lot of proposals coming up, I've got a big presentation, on the horizon, things like that, I would just kind of say to her, hey, I've got my projects are starting to come to a head. So I'm going to be pretty busy for the next 6 weeks or something like that. I try to give her a heads up, and and sometimes I was really good at doing that, and then obviously at other times not so much. One of the things that helps at the church is that she's a member of the church and serves at the church, and so she's part of the culture of the church and very plugged into it. So she understands the rhythms of it better than any other place I've ever worked, and so I think there's a degree to which that helps some. That doesn't mean that there aren't times where I need to communicate better when certain things may be going on, but that definitely has helped. So it's especially important for husbands to communicate to their wives about those things, and try to get out in front of it as much as you can. Be intentional about that. The other piece of it too, though, is your calendar is your friend. If you're not the administrative type and you generally don't like writing things down or whatever, one thing you got to make sure you do is just use the calendar on your phone. And if you're not the type that kind of tends to keep appointments, make sure that things you need to be at for your family are in your calendar, and you got a reminder that's going to hit you a couple days prior and then the day of, and so that you make sure that you remember things that matter to them that you need to be a part of. And that can help you to kind of get out and to keep those things on your radar when the water level starts getting high at work.
Yeah. I love that you said be intentional. It is an intentionality of, like, if I could sit here for 20 minutes and scroll, those are 20 minutes that I could have been spending with my family. So I've been really intentional about that too. And
That's good.
and if they're not busy, hey, what are you doing? Jumping in their rooms and hanging out with them, or let's go for an ice cream. And we always go to our favorite place when they were little. And so just that intentionality of being able to say, yes, I'm in a busy season, but I can take an hour away from what I'm doing right now to spend with you. And real intentional 1 hour I think our kids don't need more than an hour, then they're just done. They want to do their own thing. And those increments are really important too. Going back to ministry, I think involving people, involving your family into the ministry, involving your family into your work life. I remember when I was coaching volleyball at Sierra Linda, and, you know, my girls were right in the midst of that gym. They grew up seeing volleyball, shagging balls for us, handing me a ball while I was hitting the girls. They car washed with us. So they were a part, even though I was still doing work-related things, they were still a part of that. And so how can you involve your family? Now within ministry, you know, I have them come in and help us paint, or they package things for the busy seasons. And it still creates, yes, those moments of memories. Yes, it's getting my work done, but it's still work that they're now intentionally giving back to, you know, the ministry or into God's work. So find those times where you can say, this is a big project, but here are some open areas that we can spend together. Or, you know what, we still need a date night. And that's important. I think Hector messaged me yesterday and said, hey, are you available Friday? And this was literally yesterday. I'm not even making it up. And then I was like, yeah, I don't work Fridays. And he said, okay, 4:00, you have a date with me. And I was like, okay. Like, you know, just making sure that you find time for your spouse. And that could be just sitting on the couch doing absolutely nothing, or actually finding a time for a date night. That's super important, I think, to get the rhythm going. And Hector's super patient at home, and he's seen me in busy seasons, and he's seen me where it's like, are you not moving from this couch in your pajamas all day? And I'm like, I'm not moving at all right here. So whatever you need to happen needs to happen and revolve around this place. But he's great, and it's not always that way for other people. You know, their spouses are demanding or expecting things from you, and you still have a busy work life. So being intentional with our time and finding those moments where you can catch your breath and be able to recharge, so that you can create those balances. So
I love that.
That's my advice.
To give Sonia a little bit of a shout out, something Mike mentioned too, is being in ministry, like we have the freedom to bring our families in and to do things together at work. And I've loved seeing Sonia bring in her mom and her kids and her siblings and all these really fun things, and doing work with family. And it's easier for us, but it's possible in a lot of places. And being creative and being like, okay, I have to do this project at home that it's going to require me to be away from my family, but can I include them somehow? Can I get their encouragement? Can I have them help me with something? I think is really cool. And being that intentional member of your family and your work and bringing that all together, I think is just so awesome. And I loved hearing from both of you today of just the wisdom that you've had in good seasons and in bad seasons with this balance. And so hopefully that speaks to the people listening. But we hope you guys enjoyed. We hope you check out our last couple episodes and the ones in the future. And as always, if you have any topics you'd love to see us discuss, please email us, familylife@palmvalley.org. We'd love to hear those, or drop them in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. We'd love to hear those. And we've talked a lot about Easter, and if you're watching this when it comes out, Easter's right around the corner. So join us at Palm Valley Church. We'd love to see you there. But other than that, have a fantastic day. God bless.